The first battlefield is always within. Long before two nations build armies or launch weapons, they shape the lens through which they view each other. That lens is perception. It is here, in the quiet workings of the human mind, that the seeds of conflict are sown. A thought becomes a belief hardens into ideology, and ideology becomes the foundation upon which mistrust is built. In the case of India and Pakistan, the tension is not born merely of geography or politics, but of long memories and emotions that refuse to die. These memories are not passive, they are active, shaping how every move is interpreted, how every silence is measured, and how every gesture is judged. What was once an event becomes a symbol, what was once a conflict becomes a narrative, and that narrative becomes a shadow that stretches far beyond the original moment. In this way, perception is not just an idea, it is a weapon. A silent one, but just as deadly. The mind is always interpreting. It sees what it wants to see, hears what it fears to hear, and assumes what it has already decided. This is why mistrust can thrive even in times of peace. Because mistrust is not always based on what the other does, but on what the self expects. In a region as emotionally charged as South Asia, perception controls reality. A military drill becomes a threat. A political speech becomes a warning. A border incident becomes a prophecy. The heart races, not from what is, but from what is imagined. And so, two nations with histories intertwined and futures inseparably linked stand at the edge of the same river, both thirsting for peace, but both afraid to be the first to drink. This fear is not irrational. It is historical. Wars have been fought, lives have been lost, agreements have been broken, but wisdom must rise above memory. If all decisions are rooted in the past, then the future is just an echo chamber of pain. There must be a new vision, one that understands the power of perception and trains itself to see clearly without the fog of bias or bitterness. To master conflict, one must first master how one sees the other. If a nation sees its neighbor only as a threat, then even an open hand will look like a fist. But if it sees with clarity, with disciplined perception, it will see that often the enemy it fears is also fearing it, and that mutual fear is the true enemy. Training the mind to perceive clearly is not a political act, it is a spiritual one. It requires stillness. It requires the courage to look at one's own thoughts and ask, is this true? Or is this just my fear speaking? When generals make decisions from anger, when leaders speak from wounded pride, when citizens accept every headline without question, the mind becomes a battlefield long before a missile is ever launched. And when the battlefield is the mind, the weapon is the word. One speech can inflame millions, one rumor can ignite a border. One insult can undo a decade of diplomacy. Therefore, the mastery of perception is not a luxury, it is a necessity. In the quiet of meditation, when the breath slows and the noise of the world fades, one can observe how quickly thoughts arise and how easily they control us. That is the same mind that controls leaders, that is the same mind that writes policies. If it is not mastered, then it is dangerous. Nations do not clash by accident, they clash by perception. A radar blip misread, an aircraft misinterpreted, a message delayed. These are not the causes of war, they are the triggers. The cause lies deeper in the stories each nation tells itself about the other. And those stories are rarely told with balance. They are told with emotion, with pain, with pride, and often with a desire to never be vulnerable again, then peace will always be seen as surrender. And in that view, war becomes a way to maintain self-image. This is why the first battlefield is the mind. If a nation cannot tolerate the feeling of being misunderstood or vulnerable, it will respond with force, not because it must, but because it believes it must. That belief is not strategic, it is psychological. A mind trapped in fear cannot choose peace, even if it wants peace. It will always prepare for war, because it does not trust that peace will last. To transform this dynamic, there must be a new training, not of soldiers, but of perception. Citizens must be trained to ask questions before conclusions. Media must be trained to report with accuracy before sensationalism. Leaders must be trained to pause before reacting. This is not weakness, it is discipline. And discipline is strength. It takes far more strength to withhold a response than to react immediately. It takes far more courage to listen than to accuse. The one who is quick to speak has not yet mastered his mind. The one who can remain silent in the face of provocation has already won a greater war. India and Pakistan have the potential to model this inner mastery. They are not strangers to spiritual depth. Their histories are filled with sages, warriors of the mind, and teachers of inner peace. The tools are there, the wisdom is not foreign, it simply needs to be applied. Not just in temples or mosques, but in parliaments and military commands. When leaders meditate before meetings, when officers train their breath as well as their aim, when citizens cultivate compassion as well as pride, then the region can change. The missiles may still exist, but they will no longer be worshipped. The borders may still be guarded, but they will no longer be poisoned. We are as close to a nuclear clash as we are distant from inner clarity. That distance is not measured in kilometers or treaties, it is measured in perception. Change the perception and you change the future. But perception will not change by accident. It must be trained, refined, questioned, and elevated. Only then will the mind cease to be a battlefield, and only then can two nations, long shaped by conflict, become guides to a new kind of power. Not the power to destroy, but the power to see. The concept of deterrence has been celebrated by many as a shield against catastrophe, but what is often forgotten is that deterrence is not built on trust or harmony, it is built on fear. Two nations, each armed with weapons that could erase millions in moments, stand face to face not because they believe in peace, but because they fear the consequences of war. This mutual fear is what people call balance, but in truth, it is a fragile illusion. Fear cannot build peace, it can only postpone violence. And when peace is merely the absence of violence, not the presence of understanding, it is temporary. Like a volcano that appears calm on the surface, yet boils with pressure beneath, such peace can erupt with the slightest tremor. The illusion of deterrence is seductive because it provides a false sense of control, a belief that as long as both sides are afraid, neither will act. But fear is not always rational. It does not always follow rules. It can be manipulated, triggered, or misunderstood. And when that happens, deterrence fails, not because the weapons disappeared, but because the minds that held them were never stable. In the case of India and Pakistan, deterrence is often spoken of as the reason war has not happened in recent years. Leaders, analysts, and citizens alike find comfort in the thought that nuclear weapons make full-scale war But comfort based on fear is not wisdom, it is sedation. It numbs the urgency to resolve the real issues. It allows hatred to fester, mistrust to grow, and political agendas to be fueled by nationalism. Instead of working towards reconciliation, leaders use deterrence as a safety net, ignoring that even the strongest net can tear if too much weight is placed upon it. And every provocation, every cross-border tension, every skirmish in the mountains or heated rhetoric in the media adds weight to that net. Eventually, something gives. The presence of nuclear weapons has not made the region more peaceful, it has made the stakes higher. It has made mistakes more costly. It has turned routine military drills into international incidents. It has turned cyber warfare, satellite surveillance, and psychological operations into daily threats. And it has placed immense pressure on leaders to always appear strong, always retaliate, always speak loudly, even when silence would be wiser. This is the disease of deterrence. It prioritizes appearance over substance. It encourages nations to bark louder, not to listen more deeply. It replaces genuine dialogue with shows of strength. And in doing so, it creates a cycle of reaction that can quickly spiral beyond anyone's control. Peace cannot be built on the foundation of fear, because fear is unstable. It shifts, it escalates, it distorts perception. When decisions are made under fear, they are rarely wise. They are defensive, narrow, and often aggressive. Leaders who act from fear are more likely to overreact, to misread signals, to launch preemptive strikes, or to authorize responses that cannot be undone. In such an environment, deterrence is a gamble. It assumes that every actor will always be rational, always be informed, always have time to think. But human history has shown otherwise. Miscommunication, pride, confusion, or even a single technological glitch can trigger irreversible consequences. And when the weapons involved are nuclear, the margin for error is non-existent. To move beyond this illusion, there must be a shift from deterrence to understanding, from fear-based policies to wisdom-based diplomacy. True peace is not passive. It requires active cultivation. It demands difficult conversations, patient negotiations, and courageous restraint. It requires both nations to see each other not just as threats, but as fellow inhabitants of a shared region, with intertwined destinies and common vulnerabilities. The environment does not stop at a border, neither does a nuclear cloud. If war were to erupt, the destruction would not respect nationalism. It would be indiscriminate, and it would leave behind a silence that no ideology could fill. To understand this is to begin to disarm, not just physically, but mentally. Disarm the assumptions, disarm the anger, disarm the constant readiness to fight. That is the true path to security, not in the buildup of more weapons, but in the teardown of walls that divide hearts and minds. This does not mean naivety, it does not mean trusting blindly, it means recognizing that the path of fear has limits, that the strategy of deterrence is a temporary bridge, not a destination. If nations stop walking, once they reach that bridge, they will eventually fall. The journey must continue toward mutual understanding, toward empathy, toward policies shaped by human wisdom, not just strategic doctrine. In the ancient world, great warriors were often those who avoided war through wisdom. They did not draw their swords unless there was no other choice. And even then, they sought to minimize harm. They understood that every conflict left scars, not just on the battlefield, but on the soul. Today's leaders must carry that same understanding. To hold nuclear weapons and to speak of peace is a contradiction unless those weapons are coupled with a deep and disciplined effort to never use them, not just through threats, but through transformation. A transformation in how the other is seen, in how strength is measured, and in how national pride is expressed. Strength is not the ability to destroy. That is easy. Even a child with a match can start a fire. True strength is the ability to hold fire without being burnt by it, to possess destructive power and choose not to use it, not because one is afraid, but because one is wise. That is the strength the region now needs, the strength to look beyond old wounds, the strength to imagine a future not defined by fear, the strength to say no, not to weakness, but to destruction. And so, the illusion of deterrence must be replaced with the discipline of dialogue. The ritual of armament must be replaced with the habit of humility. The theater of shows of force must be replaced with the silent work of building trust. This is not the work of a day, it is the work of generations. But it must begin, because every moment spent relying on deterrence is a moment spent gambling with the lives of millions. And the more often we gamble, the more likely we are to lose. The time has come not to disarm the arsenals, but to disarm the egos that demand their existence. Not to end the military strategies, but to question their foundation. Not to silence the voices of strength, but to elevate the voices of wisdom. Only then will peace be more than an absence of war. Only then will the region be truly safe. Not because of fear, but because of understanding. Not because of weapons, but because of will. And not because of threats, but because of truth. Power in its truest form is not found in the ability to dominate, but in the capacity to maintain balance. Domination seeks control over others, while balance demands mastery over the self. Between India and Pakistan, the constant struggle has often been about showing strength, asserting dominance, and proving superiority, militarily, ideologically, politically. Yet history shows that the pursuit of domination rarely leads to stability. It leads instead to resistance, retaliation, and cycles of escalation. True balance is not achieved through overwhelming power. It is found in restraint, in understanding the limits of force, and in choosing stillness over action when the moment calls for it. In nature, the most powerful forces do not roar constantly. The ocean holds immense strength, but does not strike the shore endlessly. The mountain stands unmoved, not because it lacks power, but because it is rooted in stillness. Nations, like individuals, must learn that stability is found in inner alignment, not external control. When a nation seeks to dominate, it begins to view every action of the other as a challenge, every movement as a provocation, and every word as a threat. This mindset creates tension not because of what is actually happening, but because of how it is perceived. A test missile because of how it is perceived. A speech becomes an act of war, a diplomatic visit becomes a covert alliance. In such an atmosphere, suspicion becomes the air that is breathed and calm becomes impossible. The desire to dominate blinds leaders to the nuances of the moment. It demands immediate response, visible superiority, and unquestioned obedience. But obedience born of fear is not sustainable. Eventually, the suppressed rise, the silenced speak, and the dominated resist. The social democratic domination, therefore, is not lasting. It is a shadow pretending to be light. Balance, on the other hand, comes from deep inner stability. It does not seek to crush opposition, but to understand it. It does not need to raise its voice to prove its strength. It allows for space, listens carefully, and responds with clarity. Between India and Pakistan, this principle of balance could transform the nature of interaction. Imagine a response that is not dictated by the need to look strong, but by the wisdom of maintaining peace. Imagine policies that are not crafted to provoke, but to preserve. This is not weakness, it is maturity. Stillness is not inactivity, it is the ability to remain grounded when the world around you trembles. It is the inner silence that allows one to hear the true meaning behind words. Leaders who operate from stillness do not react to every news report or political provocation. They take time to reflect, to consult, to understand. Their decisions come not from impulse, but from insight. And such decisions are rarely wrong. A nation guided by stillness will not be easily provoked. It will not escalate conflict for show. It will not sacrifice the lives of its people for the sake of ego. Instead, it will endure what is necessary, respond only when essential, and always seek the path that leads not just to survival, but to harmony. The power of stillness in the modern world is vastly underestimated. In a time where speed is mistaken for effectiveness and loudness for leadership, the quiet leader is often overlooked. But it is this quiet strength that prevents wars, resolves conflicts, and rebuilds trust. Between India and Pakistan, there have been moments of stillness, moments where back-channel diplomacy diffused potential wars, where restraint prevented disaster, where silence healed wounds more than speeches ever could. These moments were not publicized, not celebrated, but they were powerful. They were moments where balance triumphed over dominance. They were moments where balance triumphed over dominance. Stillness must be cultivated intentionally. It is not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. It is the choice to pause before reacting, to breathe before responding, to weigh the long-term consequence before succumbing to short-term rage. If every leader, every policymaker, every military officer were trained to first quiet their inner noise before making decisions that affect millions, the shape of geopolitics would change. Wars would no longer be declared on assumptions, clashes would no longer erupt from misunderstandings, dialogues would not be derailed by pride. In the ancient traditions, those who sought power were first asked to sit in stillness, not to prove their patience, but to discover their own inner landscape. because until one sees oneself clearly, one cannot lead others wisely. A nation is only as strong as the clarity of its leaders, and leaders are only as clear as their ability to sit with uncertainty without being consumed by it. The presence of nuclear weapons makes this even more critical. When the stakes are so high, when the consequences are irreversible, the need for balance is not optional. It is essential. And balance does not arise from arsenals. It arises from awareness. To move forward, both India and Pakistan must invest not only in defense and development, but in cultivating stillness within their decision-making structures. Training in emotional intelligence, mindfulness, ethical reflection, and crisis de-escalation should not be afterthoughts. They should be foundational. Because no matter how advanced the weapon, it is still the mind that decides whether to use it. And a mind that is unbalanced will always find reasons to justify conflict. Domination promises safety through control, but balance offers security through wisdom. Domination creates enemies, balance creates understanding. Domination is loud, impatient, and forceful. Balance is quiet, deliberate, and enduring. The world does not need more dominant powers. It needs more balanced ones. Powers that lead by example, not intimidation. Powers that value the future of humanity more than the pride of a single nation. Powers that have the strength to walk away from the edge even when others are marching toward it. This is the path that lies open to both India and Pakistan. The path of stillness, the path of balance, the path where power is not measured in warheads, but in wisdom, and where the true victory is not in defeating the other, but in mastering oneself. Shall I now continue with key point No. 4? Dialogue, when approached with sincerity, is not merely an exchange of words, it is an exchange of worlds. Between nations, especially those like India and Pakistan, whose history is soaked with blood and shadowed by mistrust, dialogue is often treated as a strategic maneuver rather than a sacred practice. But true dialogue is not about argument or persuasion. It is about understanding. It begins not with the tongue, but with the heart. When two adversaries come to the table only to defend their stance or to prove the other wrong, no bridge can be built. But when both arrive with a genuine desire to listen, not just to words, but to pain, to memory, to the fears behind aggression, a different kind of communication begins. One that is not about who is right, but about what is needed. And in such moments, transformation becomes possible. The region has witnessed many failed dialogues, suspended talks, and backdoor efforts that wither in silence. But what is rarely examined is the inner quality of those conversations. Were they born from desperation or hope? Were they structured around mutual benefit or tactical advantage? True dialogue cannot grow in a soil of suspicion. It needs the nourishment of respect, even if that respect is cautious. It needs patience that outlast the noise of politics. And most of all, it needs individuals on both sides who have cultivated inner clarity so that they are not reacting from old wounds, but responding from present wisdom. Because when dialogue becomes a continuation of war through words, it serves only to deepen the divide. But when it is a conscious attempt to unearth the human beneath the flag, it becomes the beginning of peace. No treaty, no accord, no agreement holds power if the hearts behind it remain hardened. History has shown that even the most celebrated peace deals can unravel if they are not supported by a genuine change in perception. And perception does not change through paperwork. It changes through presence. When a leader An envoy, a negotiator, speaks not just from prepared statements, but from lived awareness. When their words are not rehearsed, but real, the effect is immediate. People can sense sincerity. They can feel when dialogue is being used as a shield and when it is being offered as a bridge. In a world of constant performance, sincerity becomes a rare and healing force. India and Pakistan are not just two governments. They are two living stories. Stories of partition, of trauma, of pride, of hope. And stories, when left untold, ferment, they become bitterness. But when shared, they become the beginning of healing. Dialogue, therefore, is not limited to diplomatic tables. It must happen in classrooms, in art, in literature, in cinema, in the conversations between ordinary people. Every time an Indian and a Pakistani speak not as enemies, but as humans, the arc of destiny shifts, even if slightly. And enough slight shifts can reroute even the most dangerous course. The habit of seeing the other as a threat must be broken not only at the top, but also at the grassroots. This is where sustainable dialogue begins, when it becomes not a strategy of governments, but a culture of people. Courage is often misunderstood as the willingness to fight, but in truth, the highest courage is the willingness to speak gently in a world that values shouting. It is the ability to stay at the table when walking away would be easier. It is the strength to seek common ground when division is profitable. For leaders on both sides, the temptation to appear uncompromising is great. National pride is often tied to how tough one can appear in front of the other. But the deeper pride is found in the ability to preserve life, to protect generations, and to choose wisdom over applause. It takes far more courage to speak with a rival in peace than to challenge them in war. Because war appeals to the ego, but peace challenges it. When two nations possess the power to annihilate each other within moments, every dialogue becomes sacred. Every word spoken carries weight. Every silence becomes significant. In such a reality, diplomacy cannot afford to be shallow. It must be spiritual in depth, rooted in the recognition that beyond strategy lies humanity. That the soil of Kashmir, the rivers of Punjab, the skies above the subcontinent do not belong to any one nation. They belong to all who breathe under them. And dialogue begins from this recognition. It is no longer limited by history. It begins to shape a new one. Patience is the heartbeat of meaningful dialogue. Nothing lasting is built quickly. Trust is not born in meetings. It is grown in consistency. And in the case of India and Pakistan, where the weight of history is immense, patience must become a daily discipline. There will be setbacks, provocations, and misunderstandings. But abandoning dialogue at the first sign of difficulty is like uprooting a seedling because it hasn't yet flowered. Peace is a tree that grows slowly, but its shade lasts for generations. And every moment spent in sincere dialogue waters that tree. Even if the fruits are not visible immediately, the roots deepen. To create such a culture of dialogue, both nations must invest in it, not just politically, but educationally and culturally. Curriculums that teach mutual understanding, media that highlight shared histories, exchanges that build friendships, all these are forms of dialogue too. Peace cannot rely solely on the decisions of the powerful. It must be embedded in the minds of the many, because the leaders of tomorrow are shaped by the stories they are told today. And if those stories continue to demonize the other, the cycle will persist. But if the narrative shifts, even slightly, from enemy to neighbor, from threat to mirror, the future begins to change. There will always be voices that resist dialogue, that call it weakness, that profit from division. But the presence of such voices only proves the need for stronger, calmer ones. Voices that are not swayed by temporary politics, but anchored in timeless truth. That no nation is secure alone, that no future is bright while shrouded in fear, that no war leaves victory behind, it only changes the names of the wounded. The choice between dialogue and destruction is not abstract, it is daily. Every statement, every policy, every gesture leans in one direction or the other. And in this choice lies the destiny of millions. The greatest responsibility of leadership is not to be right, but to be wise. Not to conquer, but to connect. Not to dominate, but to dignify. Dialogue, when honored with sincerity, becomes the most powerful form of defense, because it defends not territory, but truth. It protects not only borders, but bonds. And it creates a space where the past is acknowledged, but the future is not chained by it. The time is always now, the place is always here, and the way forward is always through the quiet, steady, unwavering commitment to speak heart to heart, human to human, until understanding becomes stronger than fear.